Before I get started with the story, shout out to Dark Visitor who sent me this story in the Discord. Now, this story doesn't have to do specifically with this child on the screen, but it does relate to the topic at hand. And it's ironic because all I did was go on to Google and type black kids in school, and I chose this picture. And underneath it says the mad and unhappy place of public education for black children in the United States Psychology Benefit Society. And ironically, the article that was sent to me was talking about how school policing falls hardest on black students and those with disabilities. And remember, when it comes to that school or prison pipeline, we know who that's for. So this article is coming from USA Today, and it was posted on September 8th, 2021. A school safety officer removed a third grader from class, took him to a staff bathroom, closed the door, and berated him, telling the frightened child to stop crying like a little girl. His crime? Refusing to leave art class after an argument with another student at their Northeast Philadelphia elementary school. In the aftermath of the 2017 incident, the Philadelphia school issued a statement acknowledging it was not handled correctly, but a charged encounter with an officer in school is far from rare. Nationally, students were referred to law enforcement nearly 230,000 times during the 2017-2018 school year, exemplifying why demands to restrict policing at schools are growing. Did you see that? Do you hear that? 230,000 times nationally in the course of one school year that the police were called. And I bet you it wasn't over anything, just like what is referring to right here in this story, because of an argument the students had. You called the police for that? You got some police officers that can't help themselves, said the child's father, Isaac Gardner. You're taking a little elementary school child in the bathroom. You ain't supposed to be doing that. A Center for Public Integrity analysis of U.S. Department of Education data found that school policing disproportionately affects students with disabilities, black children, and in some states, Native American and Latino children. Nationwide, black students such as Gardner's son and students with disabilities were referred to law enforcement at nearly twice their share of the overall student population. Schools in some states are far more likely than others to refer students to law enforcement, regardless of their race and disability status. New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Wisconsin schools, for instance, did so at rates at least twice the national average. The repercussions ripple through communities in urban, suburban, and rural areas alike. In Virginia, they have a graph on here, and Virginia is the highest one. It's the highest one. I'm not surprised that's coming out of Virginia. My state is kind of down the list. It's like probably in the top 20 if I'm counting this right. But yeah, so the highest state is Virginia and the lowest state is Massachusetts. Well, they threw Puerto Rico on there because it's a territory. Lancaster County Public Schools, a 3-school district in remote eastern Virginia, had a referral rate 17 times the national average. In Philadelphia, one of the nation's 20 largest school districts, the referral rate for all students was 7 times the national average. 31 states, as well as the District of Columbia, refer black students to law enforcement at more than twice the rate of white students, the public integrity analysis found. That's funny. They can report all these black students to law enforcement, but who's the ones who be committing all the mass shootings? They're criminalizing some ordinary behavior of students, and they're certainly disproportionately referring students of color, black, to the juvenile justice system rather than disciplining them at school, said Maura McErney, legal director at the Education Law Center, a Pennsylvania legal advocacy group. In 2017, a national study at the University of California, Irvine found that on-campus arrest rates for children younger than 15 increased in areas where the federal government made grant money available in 1999 for school resource officers, a response to the mass shooting at Columbine High School. The funding was available whether a district struggled with crime or not, which helped researchers tease out the impact. Nationwide, roughly a quarter of law enforcement referrals lead to arrests, federal data shows, but students may still be issued citations that require them to appear before judges or other juvenile court system officials. The federal data doesn't specify what the referral was for nor the result. In 2019, a Vermont student with a disability that causes bone pain was forcefully subdued by a school resource officer after educators suspected erroneously that the 17-year-old had a vape. Wow. That'll be the day. Not saying that they don't engage, but I've yet to see. That'll be the day. See, what they do is they go after the kids that they feel they can take advantage of and get away with. So they know they're not going to go after them white kids because they know them white parents ain't going to stand for it. And they already know who they're funding in their bread. They know who butters their bread, so to speak. The officer demanded to search his backpack. The boy objected using foul language, and the officer told him that he was acting retarded. The officer pushed the student to the floor, arresting and handcuffing him and leaving him with bloody knuckles and bruised wrists. In Vermont, students with disabilities accounted for 48% of students referred to law enforcement in 2017 to 2018. That's the highest among all states and more than twice their share of the overall student population. These are kids that school districts have traditionally not done a good job of helping, said Diane Smith Howard, managing attorney for criminal and juvenile justice for the National Disability Rights Network. They don't do a good job. The kids act out, and then instead of fixing the problem, they call the police. After the 2019 incident, the boy missed classes during a months-long battle in juvenile court over charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Charges that were dropped after police released cell phone and body cam videos of the incident. Like I said, this is just basically reading out like the school to prison pipeline. That's basically how this is playing out. That's basically what it is. The teen eventually earned his diploma from an adult school. A settlement last year with the city and his school district, Maple Run Unified, required a $30,000 payment to the teen and training for the officer, but a non-disclosure agreement restricts public discussion about the case. This spring, civil rights attorneys sent out a letter of protest to Vermont education officials, later discovering that two school districts, one of them Maple Run, used Medicaid funding intended for students with disabilities to instead hire school resource officers, or SROs. Wow. So the school definitely plays a part. They took the money that they were supposed to be using more towards the disabled students in the school and used it to hire more cops. So you wanted to take the money away from those who needed it to put it into those who don't need it and bring in more problems, is what you're saying. The roots of school policing reach back to 1948, when Los Angeles formed a security unit that grew into a full-fledged school-based law enforcement agency. In the 1950s, Flint, Michigan posted officers borrowed from city ranks in schools to serve as liaisons in an anti-crime strategy. School shootings led to an expansion of this policing. Zero tolerance for weapons morphed into crackdowns on kids' behavior. Between 2006 and 2018, the sheriff's schools reporting the presence of at least one security officer on site at least once a week grew from 42% to 61%. The higher the enrollment and proportion of children eligible for free or reduced price school lunches, the more likely schools are to have security, according to a 2020 report from U.S. Departments of Education and Justice. And that's a subliminal text right there. Free reduced lunch. Think about what students get free and reduced lunch. I mean, I don't have to spell it out for you. We all was in elementary school. Who was the kids that got the free and reduced lunch? Federal funds remain, well, I would say as a majority, not saying all of them, but a majority. Federal funds remain available to schools that want to hire police. And because of the specter of school shootings, many parents, staffs, and children like to know an armed officer is on site. The University of California Irvine study found that principals in schools with more officers reported lower rates of criminal incidents. But with that decline came an increased likelihood that children accused of disruptive behavior will come into contact with someone in the criminal justice system rather than a principal or dean of students. So it's like a double-edged sword. It's like, on the one hand, it's good that they're there because the crime inside the schools is going down, seemingly. But on the other hand, they aren't making it better because they're getting into it with the students, and the students, instead of, like they said, disciplining them in the school, they're getting disciplined inside of a courtroom. And a lot of times, those charges end up being dropped because it's petty. Like, the judge is probably sitting there like, why are you bringing this to me? Like, how is a kid disrupting your class something to bring to me in court? Unless he's like threatening you, like maybe to like do some physical harm to you or something like that, don't bring that in front of me. But I also think too is because a lot of those faculty members don't want to deal with this with the students either. I think that's another part that plays into it as well. Increasing outcry and concerns that children of color are targeted have prompted some districts to remove police from schools. The trend quickened after a Minneapolis police terrorist murdered George Floyd, a black man, in 2020. Some states, Virginia most notably, have also taken steps to slash referrals of children to law enforcement for minor incidents. A 2015 public integrity investigation identified Virginia as the top state for referrals in the 2011-2012 school year. The Commonwealth's rate of about 16 referrals per 1,000 students was nearly 3 times the national rate. The investigation revealed that Virginia middle school students, some with disabilities, were arrested and charged with crimes such as felony assault on police and obstruction of justice. In 2020, after years of adopting and rejecting multiple reforms, legislators approved a bill making Virginia the first state to prohibit police from charging students with disorderly conduct at school or school-sponsored events. Legislatures also removed language from the state code that educators said contributed to driving up referrals because many believed it obliged them to report any potential crime, including a possible misdemeanor. The reforms went into effect in July 2020. The Virginia-based Legal Aid Justice Center pressed lawmakers for years to enact the changes, producing reports that highlighted widespread disparities in referral rates and cataloging stories of children charged with crimes for minor rule offenses. It's a great step, said Rachel Dean, the legal director of the Youth Justice Program at the Legal Aid Justice Center. But I still think that pieces of the puzzle that aren't in place yet will mean continued high numbers of referrals from schools to law enforcement. Public Integrity's analysis of the most recent data available found that in 2017 to 2018, before these reforms were approved, Virginia schools were still collectively reporting students to law enforcement at 3 times the national rate, topping all other states. The Lancaster County schools, serving about 1,160 students that year, had a rate higher than any other traditional Virginia district, behind only small alternative schools, tracking both state and national trends. Black students and students with disabilities in the district made up a disproportionate share of referrals. Also striking is the focus on younger children. Educators refer students 65 times from Lancaster Middle School of only 396 students and 19 times from the similarly sized elementary school, compared with 14 at Lancaster High School. So that they damn near sending almost their whole damn student body to be referred or be referral to these law enforcement agencies. Lancaster County Public School Superintendent Dan Russell said he expects those numbers to fall now that Virginia law no longer requires educators to notify police of an incident. The process, he said, often went no further than a simple conversation about 2 students horseplaying. If officers isolate children and speak to them about an incident, Russell said an administrator must be present. Russell also said only 7 incidents in the 2017-2018 school year led to more serious police involvement, but that school records didn't indicate why. Lancaster Sheriff's Captain Martin Chirilla said that if educators notified them about an incident, a school resource office would keep a record for statistical purposes. Research shows that those early interactions can have lasting effects. A 2021 Tulane University and University of Washington study tracking Seattle public school students over time found lingering effects from middle school interactions with police. Black respondents who experience contact with police by 8th grade have 11 times greater odds of being arrested when they are 20 years old than their white counterparts. Now look at that. They said black respondents who experience contact with the police by the 8th grade. So that means if we're doing age-wise, we're talking about by the time they're 13. See, it's like they know this stuff, but they choose to try to bypass and ignore it or to aid in keeping it going. With the advent of cell phone video, the public has seen indisputable evidence that some officers are injuring or threatening students, including some as young as 5 years old. The Advancement Project, a civil rights organization, documented at least 62 cases between 2010 and 2018 where police officers were accused of assaulting students. A video that went viral this year shows 2 police officers in Montgomery County, Maryland, haranguing, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, a sobbing kindergartner they subdued and handcuffed in 2020 after he walked out of school. Officers screamed at length at the child, with one declaring, "That is why people need to beat their kids." Grainy cell phone video taken in March 2018 at a high school in suburban Minneapolis showed the tense moments before a police officer deployed a stun gun to subdue a then 14-year-old high school student, leaving him hospitalized after the school resource officer called for backup. Burnsville Police Department records indicate that 7 officers responded to an incident of disorderly conduct. Not all incidents are captured on camera, though, or even federal records. According to the federal data, the Pittsburgh district made 191 referrals to law enforcement and had 0 arrests during the 2017-2018 school year. The district acknowledges that that's inaccurate because of a data entry error. Schools and districts enter their own figures into the federal database. With tens of thousands of such entities, some errors are inevitable. Nevertheless, the data is the only detailed information on discipline that covers nearly all public schools, and experts in the field say the stark disparities it shows are real. For years, civil and disability rights advocates have pressed school boards and state lawmakers to get police officers off campuses, arguing that they often pose risk to students that they were hired to serve. Cops are trained to be cops, said Marilyn Mahusky, staff attorney for the Disability Law Project at Vermont Legal Aid. Consistent with their training, they demand that their behavior stop, and if it doesn't, you're charged and you're arrested. In January 2018, 2 weeks after scuffling with Fairhaven, Vermont, police in a bathroom stall at her high school, a student in distress found herself in trouble again. She returned to school in violation of her at-home suspension and refused to leave the principal's office. This time, officers restrained and arrested the girl, who later faced charges of assault on law enforcement, disorderly conduct, trespassing, and resisting arrest. While on the way to the hospital, the defendant stated she wanted all of us to die and that she wanted to die as well. Mahusky was among the advocates backing state legislation that would prohibit schools from hiring school resource officers, called SROs for short. The state governor, Phil Scott, argued that local school districts, not state lawmakers, should make that decision. While the legislative push in Vermont failed, dozens of school districts across the country have canceled their contracts with police departments or cut their policing budgets, some after identifying disparities in referrals and arrests. The Minneapolis, Oakland, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle school systems ended their agreements with local law enforcement agencies. 2 of the nation's largest districts, Chicago and Los Angeles, slashed their budgets, the former by half and the latter by almost a third. Change also came to places such as Des Moines, Iowa, where the school board ended an agreement with at least 2 decades with the city police department this winter. During the 2017-2018 school year, what I'm finding is a lot of this stuff is coming from those 2 years in particular, because it's mentioned a lot. Federal data showed that black students represented 42% of all law enforcement referrals in the district, more than twice their share of the student population. Deborah Van Velzen, an officer with the Des Moines Police Department, patrolled the halls at district schools for 15 years before taking on a new role in late 2019 as youth services coordinator for the police department, overseeing youth mentoring and diversion programs. We don't want to send kids to court. That's not our goal, Van Velzen said. But in her current role, she has noticed racial disparities in her court referrals. You know, I'm actually going to stop right there because, like I said, this is a very long article, but I think y'all pretty much get the point. What I'll do is I'll post the link to the article down below and you can read the rest of it. But this is a very long article, but I think by now you pretty much get the point. It's something that's been in place for a very, very, very long time. As you can see, they even went back to the 40s with this. That having the school resource officers in these schools is not helping anything. It sounds good on paper, but in the physical sense, it's not good. And when I'm reading this, it reminds me of the story that happened a few years ago in South Carolina with that SRO that came into the classroom and literally snatched that girl out of her desk while her leg was still caught up in the desk and caused the desk to drag along with her. And would you believe there was a lot of people that actually felt that the cop was justified by people? I'm talking about other black people that felt he was justified in what he did. That shit like riled me up. I'm like, what if that was your kid? Then you wouldn't be saying that. You would be up there trying to find him to beat his ass for dragging your child out of the desk or trying to drag them out of the desk the way that he did. And I also remember the other one where the girl, it was a little black girl. She was in the classroom. She was basically being unruly. And instead of calling the child's parents, they called the SRO or law enforcement and came and put this girl in handcuffs, and then that's when she had a whole tantrum, and that's what, and if y'all I'm sure some of y'all remember that particular video. But yeah, so that's pretty much the gist of it. Like, this is, it's basically the school to prison pipeline, the 2021, the 2010s and up edition of it. That's basically all it is. And you know what's so crazy? Like, if you looked at a lot of urban like schools that were like in the city and stuff like that, especially back in the day, ever notice how a lot of them had bars on the windows? So it almost feels like you're walking into a prison, and when you walk into the school, you have to walk through a metal detector and get searched. It's like you were literally walking into a prison. But of course, since then, they have done away with all of that, as far as I know. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this down in the comments.